So thanks again, guys, for coming. This second part, we're going to get a little bit darker, actually, because you've got to go dark to see the light, right? So apparently that's what happened to me anyway. Maybe not, hopefully not for you so much, but there'll be, honestly, some pretty important takeaways from this, which is also going to be a setup for the last part. It's done very intentionally, and I can only praise God for the end result of where my life's ended up from where I went. So just remember where we were when I said to you that this is the part that we're going to come back to, because we're about to touch on that. So I've held back this part of my testimony for this. So this part two, is titled, Will You Sell Your Soul? And this has happened to me, like I went down this path, but it is a question for you guys individually. And as I said, it may sound really ominous and like an obvious thing that you're going to go, no, absolutely no way. But we're going to get to how this may well happen in a very subtle way, and I believe is happening in the world now. So our King, the Messiah, asked this question, and he said, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? And I would ask the question, if we consider what this is really talking about and what this can look like. And we live in a modern time where we do hear about selling your soul. And as I said, that can look very, very obvious, but I believe that there's far more subtle ways that this can happen, and especially for us living here in the West. So we're dropping back into that part of my story where I said, this is the part that we're going to come back to. And I was still at this stage of my life very desperate for fame and external validation. I was looking for the world to validate me. And I thought that if I could make it when it came to music and I had the adulation of the world, that I was going to be sorted. So this was like a deep-seated issue which was set up for childhood. And as you'll see, I was groomed for a very specific environment. So I was about to take a pretty dangerous path. Now, in my process of having just gone to record in America with those big producers, my music falling apart at that stage, my band breaking apart, I had a couple of years off music, but it got to the point where I was starting to want that drive, that insatiable need for success started to really pick back up in me. So I started to look up different musicians, different rock stars, and famous people really, just to see if I could find any kind of connection about how I could make it. Like I knew that it wasn't going to be an issue of talent necessarily, it was going to be about being in the right place at the right time with the right people. And as I looked into each of these quite famous people that we probably all would know, at the end of the road of a lot of these different people kept appearing this certain word or this certain group of people that promised to make good men great, and was a universal fraternity that claimed to have been around since time immemorial, from the dawn of time, that claimed to have been there since the Tower of Babel and before. And most presidents and founding fathers of this country, most politicians all over the world, people in the arts, people in literature, science, all of these great, famous men belonged to this specific organisation. So I decided at a certain point that I would join Freemasonry. And this was around 2015 that I approached the Masons, and I started to go down my path of getting initiated into this order. And this was a bit of a stepping stone for where I would end up very soon. And at one of the dinners after the Masonic meetings, which are called Souths, so they're just a dinner that's after each Masonic meeting, I was at one of these early meetings and I ended up getting sat next to a relatively higher up Mason who was representing what's called Grand Lodge. So Grand Lodge is the overarching body that looks after a certain region when it comes to the Masons. So he was there on behalf of what's called the Worshipful Master, and his role is basically to make sure that standards are being maintained and to extend the right hand of fellowship to each of the lodges under the jurisdiction of that Grand Master. He sat next to me at this dinner and he started asking me questions about why I decided to join the Masons. And I told him the story about how I'd consulted a medium not too long before, and as soon as she had this conversation with me, the first thing she said was, "I have your grandfather standing in front of me in his Masonic regalia." And I was like, that's all I need to know. It's in my bloodline, I'm definitely joining. Now, we do have some specific warnings in the Bible about consulting the dead and mediums and divination and all that. It turns out much later on I did contact the Grand Lodge in New Zealand to discover my grandfather's membership, and none could be discovered. So this was the very first thing that this woman said to me when I got on this call, like to have this conversation with her. It was, she said what I wanted to hear. So how those spirits knew, I'll let you be the judge. But anyway, this guy was really interested. And he goes, "So you believe in otherworldly spirits and you believe in mediums?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course, like, doesn't everyone?" It's pretty ignorant. And he goes, "Well, have you heard of this order with 3 letters, 2 of which are the same, and they bookend a T?" I'll make it more obvious soon. But he asked me if I'd heard of this order, and I had, because in my research I'd come across this order. They were pretty dark. And he encouraged me that if I was interested in joining, then I should reach out through their website, make contact, and ask to be initiated. So towards middle of 2015, I was initiated into this secret society called the OTO, or the Ordo Templi Orientis, or Order of the Templars of the East. So their maxim is this four-word phrase down the bottom, which is "do what thou wilt." I said in part 1 that that was something to remember. So before I had even come to this path, my band with Sixth Section, very much the intention was living this "do what thou wilt" mentality. Do whatever you want. Take on the sick part of each of us and bring it out into the open. Now this order, make no mistake, is categorically satanic. It's very veiled that it's not. They don't outright come and say that in any of their writings whatsoever. But if you know what you're looking for, it's pretty obvious that this is a satanic organisation. So I ended up getting initiated into this group. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but for anyone that doesn't know much about the order, it was made famous and really brought into the open by a pretty famous occultist, a guy by the name of Aleister Crowley, who was a member of many secret societies. He was a very high-ranking Mason, part of the Golden Dawn. He was into magic, known as the wickedest man in the world. And this guy was big time. Like, if you know anything to do with the occult world, this guy's name you'll know. Like, you can't not know. He mentored personally a guy called L. Ron Hubbard, who ended up creating an organisation I'm sure you've heard of, called the Church of Scientology. And he also inspired another guy called Anton LaVey, who went on to found the modern Church of Satan. So these are a couple of organisations which are pretty big here, but the OTO is still relatively unknown unless you know what you're looking for. Like, it's not as big as Scientology, let's say. Crowley himself called himself the Great Beast 666, Baphomet, which is that goat-headed creature that you see up there next to his name, which is basically the image of the satanic deity of this mixture of good versus evil, female, male, light versus dark, animal versus human. And it's an amalgamation of this and a representation of Satanism and this connection with the beast. He also called himself Tu Megatherion, which in Greek means the great beast, as in the great beast of Revelation. So this guy claimed these titles. And over 3 days in the early 1900s, he was channeled and communicated this, what they call, their Bible is called the Book of the Law. If anyone knows much about the Torah, it should be ringing some bells by now. So this satanic order, their Bible is called the Book of the Law. And it was done by an otherworldly entity, which Crowley called Oase. And he was hugely influential in music. So this guy has inspired the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Doors, Led Zeppelin, Ozzy Osbourne, David Bowie, Marilyn Manson, Jay-Z. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I bet you all the stuff that's going on with Diddy has something to do with this too. But at the heart of the OTO is a religion. So the OTO is like the organization, like the church, and our religion is Christianity, or whatever you want to call our religion. So Thelema, this Greek word, Thelema, is the religion of this organization. It stands for will, or like divine purpose in Greek. We're going to dive a little bit more into this because it's really, really important, and it does relate to you. But it's the religion of the OTO and another organization which is very closely interconnected called the AA, or the Orchestrum Astrum. And this is there is hardly any information on this organization. These guys are it's a magic. You only know the initiate above you. You don't know any more information. Like, you literally are being initiated by one person who's being initiated by someone on top. It is super, super secretive. Through Thelema, part of this practice, through this religion, is to perform ceremonial magic and sex magic. So sex magic is basically harnessing what they consider to be the potent power that comes through the act of sex, being able to harness and focus one's mind and will at the point of orgasm for power, and ingesting certain bodily fluids which contain potent power and stuff as well. They have a mass which they call the Gnostic Mass. If anyone knows much about the Gnostics and the history that goes through the Middle Ages into the early days as well, back in the very early times of the Bible, it has nothing to do with biblical Christianity or biblical faith whatsoever, but they have a Gnostic Mass at which point they ingest a Eucharist like a communion, which is called a cake of light, and it is best served with either female menstrual blood or the blood of children. And as I said, the Bible is called the Book of the Law. So what is Thelema? What does this word mean? And this is important. This is really important. So the word itself means the will or the purpose. In the order they talk about an individual's divine purpose. But who's the divine character they're talking about? Because it's surely not the God of the Bible, Yahweh, Yehovah. It's another divine entity whose will is being perpetrated here on earth. Now remember that maxim, do what thou wilt. So the very common basic misconception of that phrase is do whatever you want. Right? This is a very basic understanding of what do what thou wilt means, is that you can just do whatever you want. Like, have whatever kind of perverted sex you want, do whatever. But truly what this Thelema, this will, really means is it's the individual purpose, like the divine purpose for why you are here and what makes me different to you, what makes you tick, which is different from me. And the true will is the fundamental principle of what a Thelemite, someone who follows the religion of Thelema, is to do with their life, is to uncover and discover your true will and to live that out. And you have no other responsibility in life other than to fulfill your divine purpose, the will. It transcends absolutely your normal desires. But if you want to do perverted stuff sexually, you want to take drugs, you want to murder people, hey, if that's according to your will, then that's fair game. But Thelema is ultimately about worshipping self. So one more stage that we'll dig a little bit deeper into is the difference between what's called the great work and the true will. So the true will is the probationer or the initiate's path, like it's the ultimate purpose of discovering why you're here on earth. And second to none, it is your responsibility to fulfill this divine calling, the will. The great work is how that is done. Right? So it's the path that you take along that journey. So they're interconnected, very, very closely interconnected, but different at the same time. So part of this great work and part of this process of discovering your true will is through practices like meditation, yoga, ritual magic, sex magic, tarot, divination, all these types of occult practices which are designed to help you fundamentally get in contact with your holy guardian angel, which is another worldly entity which is to help communicate to you your divine path. So this should seriously be ringing some alarm bells for people that have a biblical understanding. But this is the purpose, is to be able to get in contact with this otherworldly being that's supposed to help guide you along the path. And the great work of any initiate is to get in contact, to discover the true will by getting in contact with this holy guardian angel, and then to come into communion with this character here. Her name is Nuit. She's the goddess of infinite space in the OTO. She goes by another name called the Queen of Heaven, which again, if you have a biblical understanding, should be ringing alarm bells here. She also goes by other names of Isis, Inanna, Astarte, Asherah. These are biblical names where the children of Israel fell and chased after this Queen of Heaven. So in Thelema, the ultimate purpose is to discover your true will and to come into divine communion with this spirit or entity, which I'm just going to say I think has a close connection with another character which may go by the name of Lucy or Lucifer. Now, in any occult organisation or any secret society, there are initiations. But this relates to you. Okay, so what are initiations designed to do? They're designed to do many, many things. But in the occult, they're designed to convey secret or hidden or veiled information to a candidate, to an initiate, about the purpose of the organisation. So nothing's really ever told outright to you. It's all given by veiled allegory, through symbolism, through specific language, through the way that the ritual is conducted. It's all designed to convey certain information. But it's designed to bring you into covenant with the order. And in most occult secret societies, I couldn't tell you one that doesn't, it requires an oath, and generally a blood oath, which is to the death. I think they're designed to also test what you're prepared to do, as far as like giving up your will to someone else, encouraging you to see what you'll do. But initiations, and I'm talking broadly here, so listen carefully because again, this is going to relate. Initiations are designed to incrementally break down our conscience through incremental steps of perversion, and it's done subversively, slowly, so that eventually what we would consider perverted all the way over here, through incremental steps, you get to. You'd never take the full leap, but through incremental steps, this will be no problem. So it's designed little by little over time to take you from one place to another. It's also designed to humiliate and create shame, I believe. Designed to break down your will, to see what you're prepared to do. So after my first initiation into the OTO, a couple of months after, I went on what will forever notoriously be known as the cruise. I'm going to save a lot of the details, but it was a 7-day cruise that Maddie and I went on with a couple of friends to the South Pacific. We were going to a place called New Caledonia. And on night 2 of the cruise, a friend of mine and I went to the nightclub. We started drinking, which wasn't unusual. But what happened next was categorically unusual. So I blacked out, and I've only got very vague bits of information, but this story has been pieced together by many different sources for me. And I have small little fragments of information. But shortly after I blacked out, I ended up throwing some 18-year-old guy across the room. And I don't mean I just pushed him there. He went flying across the room. I'm 165 pounds at the time. I'm not a big guy. That's me soaking wet. I ended up almost killing one of the security guards to the point where he had to be put in hospital and taken off the ship in the ocean. It took 10 security guards to hold me down, and I still stood up and chucked them off me. And I only stopped because in a moment of clarity, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to hide anywhere for 5 days in the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship. So I gave up. They arrested me and they took me down and put me in a tiny cell on the boat, a boat jail, which was probably about half this area of this stage. Literally only had a small mattress on the floor with a sheet, a thick metal door like a prison, which was locked from the outside, a tiny porthole window, and all of the walls were covered in padding like you'd see in a psychiatric cell. And for the next hour and a half, I charged my body as fast as I could and as hard as I could at that metal door. I tried to rip all the grates off the roof, and I was in full meltdown of psychosis. After an hour and a half, the doctor came in, sedated me. It didn't work. So for another hour and a half, I kept going, charging over and over against that door. I ripped all the padding off one of the walls off with my bare fingers. And then at a certain point, I went crazy, broke, tried to kill myself, grabbed the sheet off the floor, wrapped it around my neck. The door came open, they sedated me again, and I was out for a couple of days. So I'll let you think about what might have happened during that time. So I'm going to save a lot of the details about what happened, but let's say it wasn't a good cruise. I probably won't go on another one again. But after a couple of days, I woke up. Maddie had been in contact with the security officer of this whole 4,000 people ship. It was a big deal, and was told that upon arrival back into Australia, the Australian Federal Police would be waiting for me, and I'd be arrested and deported from Australia back to New Zealand, not allowed to return to Australia. They detained me, they refused to give me medication, they refused to let me get a change of clothes. I was locked in the cell for a couple of days with no contact to the outside world. Maddie ended up having to get in contact with her dad, who was a lawyer, to have a lawyer on standby, to contact the New Zealand consulate, the New Zealand embassy, who contacted the captain of the ship, and they only then released me from the room from where they were holding me. Again, it wasn't a good trip. But as we got off in Sydney to walk out into the overseas passenger terminal to be arrested by the Australian Federal Police, there was no one there. The father fully protected me. I just walked off. I think in big part, there were definitely some human rights atrocities that happened because of the way that they held me and what they'd done. And I don't think the ship actually wanted the issue, but regardless of what happened, I walked out. I didn't drink for another 9 months because I thought it was purely the drinking. It was so ignorant. I literally thought that the issue was the drinking. And in part it was, but it wasn't just the drinking. So shortly after that 9 months, I was like, I'm in control of drinking. I can take care of this. I'm going to start drinking again. And things started off pretty innocently for a little while, but it wouldn't be long before I was going through more initiations into the OTO. And surprise, surprise, in the OTO, they also do discipleship, right? Yeah, so in Satanism, they also have discipleship. So one night, I went to my mentor's house, and after I got drunk, I said to him very boldly, look, I'm not going to beat around the bush. I know how this works. I want to be famous. I'm happy to represent the dark side. I'm happy to do whatever it is that you want me to do. Help me get famous. Let's make my music go. And he goes, you've been loyal and trustworthy. Who do you want to work with? And I go, so-and-so and so-and-so. Enter the biggest name in the world if you like, whoever you think. And he goes, I can facilitate making that happen. Let's go. So from that point there, my life literally was getting to this point where I had to go now to absolute rock bottom to come back out. And the Father worked quick. So at the same time, so this mentor had 2 little disciples. It was me and this other girl. And she was categorically far more advanced in the occult than me. She was absolutely a witch, 100%. At this time, and it's pretty traumatic even to say, but at this time, I absolutely would have killed to get what I wanted. Like, I would have killed someone if that was required. Like, that's how distorted, warped, gone I was from humanity. And I was waiting for that. But this chick started talking to me about some initiations that I'd potentially have to go through, and in a very veiled and allegorical way, she came up to me and she asked me one day, would I be prepared to pour my blood out into the cup of Babylon, or the Graal, to become an empty vessel? And I said that I was. So it was game on. Like, I was fully prepared to sell my soul. So remember that scripture that we read before. What will a man do? What will they do in exchange, give up in exchange for their soul? So I was prepared to go to the end. Like, this is how perverted I was, and like, my mind was gone. I was prepared to give up everything for fame, regardless of any eternal life. This is like, I was wrecked. We're getting to how this relates to you very, very soon. But see, I would channel, and this is how I wrote my music. I'd get high, I'd smoke weed, which is not a good drug, regardless of any kind of medicinal purpose or anything like that. It does cause a lot of issues, and it puts you in an altered state. And I would get into this state, and it was no longer me that was in there. Artists talk about automatic writing, and that is absolutely what happened to me. Something else would come in, and I liken it to being in a car where I've jumped into the back seat and someone else is driving me. That's absolutely what it was like. I'd write songs in no time at all, but it was no longer me that was there. And it was scary, like, it was dark, the power that it felt. But at the same time, the darkness is really seductive. Like, it's a very, very seductive power. And I was prepared to go there. So I channeled. And I'm going to give you a little warning, because I'm about to show you where it got me in regards to my music. Some of you may have seen this, some of you won't have though. But when I recorded this music video, which was a song called Mum, it was a dark song that was given to me about 20 minutes, and it was all about what I wanted to do to get revenge on my mum. When I was recording this video, one of my friends was there, and after the first session of like 4 that we recorded, he came up to me and he goes, "What's it like to channel?" And I had no idea that anyone else had any clue as to what was going on, but these guys could see that there was something else trying to show itself to the world. And I was fully prepared to show this darkness to the world, and this was absolutely the path that I was going down. So what I really want you to take away from this is just kind of how not normal this is, and to see what it was that was showing itself out of me. So it's only about a minute long. Here we go. Talk about It's hard for me to watch too. Like I was being taken. And it's dark, man. Like it's actually hard to know like just how close I was to gone, like eternally gone. And I was so happy to be like the Pied Piper leading people, just like I am evangelizing, like I was prepared to recruit for the dark side, to damn people. I didn't care if it meant that I got what I wanted to get. And there are people out there that are absolutely doing this, and this is real, like it's not even a joke. So, now that the foundation has been laid, so how does this relate to you? Because it absolutely does. And everything that I've just mentioned through all this with the initiations and everything absolutely relates to you. So let me get to it. Because as I said, it wouldn't be so obvious as with me. But I believe that there's a plan to initiate the world into the occult. And it's being done very, very subversively and very subtly. And you are part of it. And so is everyone else out here. Remember what I said about initiations as we go through each of these stages. It is done progressively and over time. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of how we individually and as a civilization are slowly being initiated into satanic ways through everything that I talked about, right, with the specific stuff that I was involved in. So this is one. Porn is definitely one way that we're getting initiated. So over the last 30 years, since we've had the ability to have access to the internet, we can do whatever we want from what we consider the privacy of our own rooms. We don't think anyone's watching us, although someone is watching us, of course, as well. But now it's got to the point where if you've got any kind of fantasy, you're going to be able to find someone that's going to share that fantasy with you. But it's one of those things where I first started watching porn at 10 years old. And I was, as soon as my grandma would go out or whatever, I would start watching porn. So could you imagine like how my young 10-year-old's mind would start to get, as I started to adventure through all of the different paths of what's available on the internet, how it would then set me up to view women, what kind of desires I would start to develop, what started as innocent by the time I was 30 years old was completely perverse. Completely. Like it absolutely degraded me through this journey. And it does to everyone that gets involved in it. As I said, it's step by step, as a slow degradation to the point where our society is today as a hyper-sexualized society. And it's just seen as normal. And it isn't. Everything I'm about to say, think about 100 years ago if any of this stuff would ever have been accepted by our society. But where we are today, it had to have been done incrementally through initiation, through the breakdown of you and me and everyone else to be able to make it acceptable. But yet it caused me to view women as objects. And it just set unrealistic standards of the kind of sexual acts that should be performed in a relationship. And I'm not even talking biblically, like I'm talking just what people in the world think of. Seeing certain sexual acts that become your fantasies, and seeing, if you watch the same kind of sexual acts over and over again, and you see many different people performing those, it emboldens you to then act those out and to try them because you consider it to be acceptable because you see a lot of it. This is how subtle initiations work. This is another obvious one, but it's very, very closely related to this. But sex is an initiation. I remember the first time I had what I would consider like losing my virginity, although I probably lost my virginity at a very, very young age categorically, but the choice of mine to have sex with a young woman where we both lost our virginity at like 14 years old, that's an initiation. Like the first time you have sex is an initiation. The first time you get a tattoo is an initiation. The first time you do drugs is an initiation. These are initiations into things. And the occult uses these specific things, sex, drugs, tattoos, all those kinds. They're actual initiations that happen through occult practices. And this is being done as part of our culture. And it's becoming normal. And if you're not shocked, like, you're immune to it. Because it should be shocking. Like, this is the thing. Every one of us should be outraged at where we are. Again, if this was 100 years ago, we would be revolted to think of where our society is today. So if we're not, and we're numb to it, that's got to be questionable about the very fact that this initiation path has been going on for a very long time. And I'm going to keep building on this through this part and through the next part, because it absolutely continues. But like I said, the first time I tried heroin, I knew I'd crossed a line. It was a line I wanted to cross, but it was a specific initiation that I felt like I'd gone through. I was a different person after trying injectable drugs for the first time. It was different from taking a pill or having a line of coke, although again, those are initiations. But there's another line that happens when you go to shooting up some kind of drug. But again, how many of us have either done drugs or got drunk and done something that we would never have done if we were sober? Now that's got to be a questionable thing about whether or not it's good for our society. But in Australia and New Zealand, may well be the same here, I'm not too sure of your culture, but in Australia and New Zealand, a good night is judged on how wasted you get. Like, if you don't get absolutely obliterated, you haven't had a good night. And this is a normal part of our culture. Like, how did we get to the point of accepting being absolutely obliterated as normal? Again, it's through incremental steps of a breakdown. There's some serious issues that come obviously with drug taking, and in particular hallucinogens, and in particular things like marijuana. We've had a lot of discussions around this sort of stuff. It's affected mine and Maddie's family as well, with causing psychosis, with causing people to develop early onset schizophrenia. It's a very, very common thing, and it is dangerous. It's a very, very dangerous part of the initiatory system for people nowadays to be in touch with the ability to be able to be contacted by otherworldly entities. As I said, I used weed, specifically weed, to channel. Fame is twofold. Individually, we can want fame, like I did, but fame is also being used, and famous people are being used to initiate the youth. This seems obvious, but if you look at people like a Britney Spears, a Miley Cyrus, a Christina Aguilera, a Justin Bieber, a Justin Timberlake, these innocent child stars all go through a transitory stage where they all of a sudden become slutty, wild. They have a fan base that grows up with them, and as they transition to this different stage of their life and they become slutty and they showcase a different person to the world and different set of values, a lot of those children are transitioning with them as well, and they see their idol, they see their star doing these behaviours and thinking of it as acceptable. And this is being done over and over again. It's been done for a very, very long time. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, because you just think, again, that it's normal, it's just a developmental stage. But fame individually is a very, very dangerous one, because our enemy knows exactly what we will fall for and what will tempt us individually. This is becoming so normal. Like, if anyone watches Netflix, if anyone watches any kind of TV, this is becoming so normalized now, the acceptability of the occult. And I'm talking about real basic things like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, American Horror Story. I could go on and on and on and on. These shows are legitimately satanic. And something like Harry Potter, which seems so innocuous, this is romanticizing and providing a seductive environment to breed interest in the occult and magic. Like, it just is. And who hasn't seen some of these movies? Like, it's very, very slowly, this has become so acceptable where most people have had some kind of involvement with the occult, whether it's through the tarot, astrology, horoscopes, angel cards, which is basically tarot. These are all practices that the Bible very clearly warns us to stay clear of. And we've all been involved in it. And we're all involved, like opening ourselves up to different things. And our world, this is just normal in our world. Again, this would have been unacceptable 100 plus years ago, but here we are. And unfortunately, your culture is infecting the rest of the world. Halloween is getting massive in Australia, like massive, and it's horrible. Kids are just being sucked into this world, like unknowingly, and it comes from somewhere. Here's a couple of vehicles which are being used. Obvious, these are obvious. This should be obvious anyway, but music's been used for a very, very long time. So there's certain female rappers that are showcasing a certain style of lifestyle, that are encouraging young people to become whores. It's the rappers, the men rappers as well, that have a certain ideology and a certain way of living their life. And this should be obvious. I'm just explaining these basics, but this has been used for a very, very long time. It's the oldest trick around is music. The devil knows exactly how to use music. It's part of his roles. Movies as well. We're almost there. Like, most of us probably saw our first sex scene or kind of some softcore porn in some R-aged movie that we probably shouldn't have been watching. This is how we're being initiated. We're being exposed to things which then shows us the female or male body and entices us. We then look deeper into these things. Same with homosexuality. This is a big thing that's showcased in Hollywood, but I'm not even just talking about that. I'm talking about things like the alien agenda. In America, 50% of young people believe that aliens are real versus God. How do you think that happened? How do people actually believe that aliens are real versus God? This is initiation. This is a big one. And our country just took a step to make it illegal for kids under 16 to have access to social media. This should have been done a long time ago worldwide, for real. It's so dangerous. We're all exposed to it. We're all exposed to these unrealistic standards for body image, for how women are supposed to be or what they're supposed to look like, how men are supposed to be. Young men have the pressure of having to take steroids to look a certain way. Women have these unrealistic expectations of the Kardashians and the Jenners, which don't even look anything like what they normally would because of the amount of surgery and stuff they've had done. And the people think these are these standards for how women are supposed to be. And these are the examples and role models for young women, a glorified porn star. We're valuing materialism, money, and fame. And these are initiations. Almost done. And this is the big one. This is how it's being done. This is how it is being done. Through culture. And unfortunately, it is being done by America. America is the beast. I live in a Western country, and I've lived in 2 Western countries, New Zealand and Australia, and we look up to America for our culture. The West is watching what America does for its culture. You guys have positioned yourselves as just living the life, having the dream, and we get everything from this part of the world as far as our TV shows, our inspirations, the influence on our country is insane. Like it's crazy. But one of the things that is dangerous about how you can see where culture is extremely dangerous and the initiation that's gone on is when it comes to, I'm not going to go too deep into this controversial topic, but the whole sex thing of male and female. If you didn't used to believe in a biblical narrative, like even if you were, let's say, an atheist, science would still have been the thing that would have told you that there are 2 sexes, male and female. You would have still believed science. But nowadays, culture can come along and go, hang on, that might not be quite right. We think that we can determine the truth, that there's 72 different genders and it's totally subjective. So now culture has the sway to be able to determine what truth is over science or the Bible. And that's where we're in a dangerous part of our time and our age now, where no one wants the truth. People don't want the truth anymore. And again, it had to happen slowly and subversively. It wasn't going to happen overnight. It had to happen through the slow breakdown of our Christian values. And this is where initiation comes in. And probably one of the other big ones as well, which will come down to you and I as believers, is this word here, is compromise. So God hates mixing. He hates mixing good with evil. And one of the things that we can lull ourselves into a false sense of security with is thinking that we're not as bad as other people. But sin's sin, isn't it? So, like the word says, just because you haven't committed murder but you've committed adultery, well, you're guilty of breaking the law. So this is the exact same thing. So we need to be obviously not compromising and holding ourselves accountable. This is again where the choice and responsibility comes in for us to individually hold ourselves accountable. And this is what I'm going to go into more in the next part. We're going to come back to what Thelema means and why this is just so important biblically, because we're going to keep building on this. But I wanted to showcase a very material example, and then we're going to go into the spiritual in the next. So the question then left that remains is, I've showcased a few areas. I don't need you to put your hands up, but I want you to think introspectively if any of those areas you might be getting initiated into. If there's certain parts of the world that has some kind of hold on each of us, because in the West, we're not immune to this. And it's subversive. As I said, the enemy whispers. He doesn't stand here and make us do any of these things. He whispers. So are you selling your soul? Because remember, we're all in or all out. It's not on the fence. We're down here to pick a side. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So again, it's choices. And that Pied Piper, we'll call him America, is leading us, little rat in the West, to those gates of hell. That's part 2. We'll come back in 15 minutes and we'll go through part 3, which is going to keep building. And I know there's going to be something that's going to be interesting in it. Have a break.